Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to today's video where we are going to be discussing the pros and cons of intermittent fasting. If you are diabetic or type 1 diabetic, make sure to stick around to the end because I will be summarising the specific pros and cons of intermittent fasting for people with diabetes. But for now, let's just start with a brief description of what intermittent fasting is. So intermittent fasting, or IF, is normally used as a way to lose fat, and it is a method of fasting for a period of time and then eating for a period of time. Now there are some more strict and restrictive methods of intermittent fasting. So some people do fast for a whole day and then eat for a day, fast for a day, eat for a day, or a kind of thing where you only have a 4-hour window for eating and then you fast for 20 hours in a day. But in general, people aren't as extreme as that, especially in kind of the fitness community, and it's more of a 8-hour eating window and then fasting for 16. So for example, you won't eat until 11 o'clock in the morning is when you'll have your breakfast, and then by 7 p.m. you have to stop eating and you don't eat after that, so dinner has to be before 7. That's the basic principle of it. And the reason behind it is that in order to lose weight, you need to be consuming fewer calories than you eat. Disclaimer here, please don't think that you only burn calories through movement and exercise, because you don't. You actually burn through a lot of calories throughout the day, even at rest. So if you are new to fat loss, then I would recommend checking out my IIFYM versus intuitive eating video, where I explain tracking macros and tracking calories and that kind of thing, and how a calorie deficit works. But the method behind intermittent fasting is that if you have a smaller window of time in which you can eat, you're going to eat less, which means you can lose fat without having to go into any calculations about your individual calorie needs and your individual macronutrient needs. You can just eat for a smaller period of time and naturally you will eat less. So let's begin this video with the pros of intermittent fasting. So like I said, for fat loss, it is a much more simple way of losing fat than something like tracking your macros, because you don't have to change your diet in any way. You are just changing the time frame in which you eat, and is therefore quite a simple and easy to follow method to lose a bit of extra fat if that's what you're wanting to do. With intermittent fasting, you are also much less likely to mindlessly snack, because you have a small time frame to eat. Your meals need to be quite big, and so you don't tend to get hungry in between your meals, and so you're less likely to just reach for food without thinking about it throughout the day. I'm not saying that snacking is bad in any way. If you have seen any of my day in the life of a type 1 diabetic vlogs, you will know that I am definitely a snacker, but for some people this is a real downfall in their fat loss journey. By following intermittent fasting and having larger meals in a small period of time, they find that they don't snack as much. Again, another video that I think will be useful for you if you are someone who is struggling with fat loss is my fat loss with type 1 diabetes video. Although it is a fat loss with type 1 diabetes video, I explain the principles of fat loss and how I go about fat loss in general, and then I throw in my tips for how to stick to this plan with type 1 diabetes. But it is just a general fat loss video, which I will link to this one. The next pro of intermittent fasting is that you are less likely to over binge on junk food, because like I said, your eating time frame is quite small, your meals need to be quite large, and so once you've had your big meal, you're generally quite satisfied, you don't want any more food. And so if you're the kind of person that really binges on sweet treats or whatever your binging food is, although I don't really like the term of binging, but it kind of gets across what I'm trying to say, then intermittent fasting may work for you. Big disclaimer again though, if you are someone who binges in a disordered eating way and is struggling with an eating disorder, has previously struggled with an eating disorder or any kind of eating disordered behaviours, then do not follow intermittent fasting, because it is definitely not going to be right for you. It can be very dangerous, and you should definitely speak to a mental health professional before changing anything with your diet if you are in this circumstance. And the final pro of intermittent fasting is that some research has shown that it can help to reduce cholesterol and high blood pressure, which we all know are quite common health problems. However, the research is limited. There is some contradicting research, but I will leave all the resources that I have used to find out my information in the description box below if you want to check those out for yourself. So let's move on to the cons of intermittent fasting. Like I said, you have a limited eating window, which can be quite tricky on the social side of things. Most events these days are centered around food, and if you have, say, your normal eating window is 11 till 7 p.m, that cuts off a lot of evening social food time. Now, there are ways you can get around this, or you can just say you're not going to intermittent fast on that day, but it's just something to consider if you're the kind of person that often eats late and needs to for routine or likes to for routine, then intermittent fasting won't work for you. Like I said, intermittent fasting can help reduce snacking during your eating window because you're quite full. It can also induce really intense hunger before and after your eating window, late at night or in the morning. A lot of people can tend to wake up in the middle of the night super hungry because it's been a long time since they've eaten, and if you're really hungry, it can lead to a lot of problems like fatigue, loss of concentration, lack of energy, everything that can kind of really impact your everyday life. So that is something to consider if you're someone that generally requires a lot of food to have your energy for the day, like me. Then intermittent fasting might not work for you. Especially if you're someone that likes to get a lot done in the mornings, breakfast is really important, and if you're not eating breakfast till 11 a.m, it's kind of more brunch and you're not getting the positive effects of a good hearty breakfast for the day. Especially if you are someone who trains in the morning, intermittent fasting probably isn't the best option. It's really difficult to train on an empty stomach, particularly if you're doing something like weight training. Definitely if you're doing some kind of competitive or endurance sport, then training in the morning on a empty stomach is not a good idea, and so you'll either need to train later on. But there are also some case studies that if you are doing intermittent fasting, training later on can be quite uncomfortable and induce nausea because you eat so much in a short space of time, and you're either going to be working out in the middle of that period of time or after that period of time. So just be wary of a strict intermittent fasting regime if you are someone who really enjoys your training. If your training is impaired because of intermittent fasting, you can even reverse any results you have made because you will start to lose muscle mass, especially as a lot of intermittent fasting is done without any other regard to nutrition. A lot of people tend to neglect their protein, which will lead to a decrease in muscle mass, especially as during the fasting period, as you are not eating anything, your body will still need fuel, and so it will turn to your muscles and break down your muscle protein to use as fuel to keep you going. So there is a large chance of a loss of muscle mass if you are doing a really big fasting window. Similarly to this, like I said, if you undergo intermittent fasting without looking into your individual calorie needs and macronutrient needs and micronutrient needs, and you just say, okay, I'm going to do this by eating whatever I want within this time frame, you can tend to turn towards refined, slightly less nutritious foods rather than whole foods, which obviously these kind of foods are completely fine to eat. I include them in my diet too, but if you're not eating the whole foods as well, this can lead to a lot of nutrient deficiencies, which can lead to a whole host of health problems like fatigue, poor bone health, poor hair and nail health, lack of concentration, heart issues, you name it. It can probably be caused by a lack of a certain nutrient. So you need to be really careful when doing intermittent fasting that you're still paying attention to the nutrients that your body needs in your food. Some people, when doing intermittent fasting, can also have a tendency to actually end up eating more than they would normally because they're so worried about not eating enough during their feeding window, that they think, okay, I'm now not allowed to eat for 20 hours, so I've got to eat loads right now, and you end up eating more than you actually need because you think you've got to sustain yourself for so long. So that's just one other thing to be wary of. You need to find the right balance between eating enough to keep you going over your fasting period, but not so much that you end up actually getting the opposite result of what you were looking for when going into intermittent fasting in the first place. Again, because you are eating such large meals during your eating window, this can also cause a few digestion problems like bloating and cramps, especially if you're someone who struggles with kind of bowel conditions already like IBS. Intermittent fasting is kind of concretely not recommended for you because it can worsen symptoms of any gastrointestinal issues that are already going on because of the huge quantity of food that will be going in a small period of time. There has also been research to show that because you are fasting, this changes your hunger hormones, and any changes in your body's hormones has kind of a knock-on effect, and so the hormone changes in your body can actually have negative impacts on your periods and on women's fertility if you are taking intermittent fasting to extremes. Because of this fasting period, you can also actually slow down your metabolism because, like I said, your body still needs fuel to keep you going. It breaks down your muscle proteins, but it also tries to reduce its energy expenditure during that fasting period, and so it actually slows down your metabolism. So again, you can end up having the opposite result of what you wanted and not losing any fat. And then if you decide to stop intermittent fasting, just like with any diet that is too restrictive, it's super easy to just put that weight right back on again, especially if you just end intermittent fasting without any plan. If you've kind of reduced your calories during intermittent fasting because you've had your small time frame, and now you're adding on extra hours when you can eat and you're not taking into account the extra calories that you're eating without some kind of plan, you will probably just put all the weight back on again, especially because there's a big chance you may have reduced your muscle mass and you may have slowed down your metabolism too. Because you are also only eating in this small time frame and you're having to ignore your hunger between these hours when you're allowed to eat, you also lose touch with your body's natural hunger cues, which is kind of a big problem these days with a lot of diets, even with tracking your macros and that kind of thing. You lose touch with your body, and to be honest, a lot of the time your body is very good at knowing what you need, and so by becoming more in tune with that, it can really help with any kind of fat loss goals. And by doing this, you kind of lose an element of that because you're essentially ignoring and going completely against what your body's telling you during your fasting window, when your body might be really hungry and telling you that you're hungry but you can't eat because of this time frame. Also hasn't been too much research into intermittent fasting, and it's quite difficult to get clear-cut results from this research, so whether you want to do it or not is kind of more of a personal choice than a science-based choice, because there's a lot of contradicting research and it just really depends on you. One thing research has shown though is that it can cause hypoglycaemia in even people without diabetes. Now, hypoglycaemia is basically a low blood sugar level, which can be really dangerous. Most people won't experience hypoglycaemia, and if they do, your body has a natural way to get you out of it, but it can leave you really tired, really fatigued, really dizzy. If your body doesn't have the response to get you out of that hypo, you can faint, you can go into a coma, and it can be really serious. Now, this isn't likely if you don't have diabetes, and so it's not really something to worry about too much, but just be aware you can experience mild hypoglycemia while doing intermittent fasting, which means you may have reduced energy levels and feel a bit dizzy and a bit shaky and just not right. That's a good little segue into the diabetes section of this video. There isn't really too much to say about diabetes other than, like I just said, it can lead to hypoglycemia even in non-diabetics. So for us diabetics, there is an increased risk of hypo if you're following IIFYM, because you're going such a long period without eating, so you really need to make sure your basal doses are on point. And I wouldn't recommend one of the more extreme fasting windows. I'd say 16 hours is probably kind of the maximum, but even then that may not be safe for you depending on your diabetes care and control. On the plus side, one thing I found really useful is kind of a mild version of intermittent fasting in the evening. So I find that to get good overnight blood sugars, the best thing for me is to say after 7:30-ish at night, obviously with exceptions for like social events. I try not to eat. I try and eat everything I want to eat before 7:30, 8 o'clock at the latest, because it reduces the chance that I'm either going to go low or high overnight, and if I do, then I've still got a long time before I actually go to bed. Well, I can correct that, so I can have a snack if I'm low, or I can have extra insulin if I'm going high, that kind of thing. So having kind of a nighttime intermittent fasting has worked really well for me, but again, I don't have a small eating window. I eat breakfast quite early. I normally have like a banana at like 6:30 or whenever before I train, and then I have a proper breakfast. So I don't intermittent fast, but in the evening I find just having a timestamp cut-off point for any like evening snacks really helps me to have good overnight blood sugar control and wake up in the morning in range and ready to do my workout without having to do any correction or anything like that. So I hope this video has been informative. I feel like I ended up with a lot more cons than pros, but again, it's totally personal choice. Like I just said, I kind of intermittent fast in the evenings, but not in the mornings because I just love my breakfast. But it is personal choice. Some health benefits may outweigh the negatives for you. Just do what is right for you, your body and your lifestyle and how you like to live. I hope this video has been useful. Please give it a like if it has been, because it really helps me to know what kind of videos you're enjoying watching and what videos I should carry on making. But for now, that is it from me. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!